In the heart of the deep South, there's a place where trains no longer run, letters are never sent, and prayers echo with no reply. A quiet chapel hides more than devotion. Its silence has weight, its shadows have memory. One man, carrying only a name and a folder, steps into a town that no longer speaks, but something still listens. Stay with me, because what was buried wasn't forgotten. It was waiting. Chapter 1. The House at Bitter Creek. The house didn't just lean, it sagged, as if buckling under the weight of memories too stubborn to forget. Its frame, once bright and sanctified, now bore the desert scars, peeling white paint, sun-cracked shingles, and wooden boards bent like prayer-worn hands. It stood just beyond the reach of the highway, where the pavement gave up to dust and the mesquite grew tall enough to cast crooked shadows across the cracked earth. No sign, no welcome. Just silence. Reverend Jonah Marks pulled his old Ford to a slow halt beneath a sagging cottonwood tree, its brittle leaves twitching in the wind like nervous fingers. The car engine ticked as it cooled. He sat for a moment, hands still on the wheel, watching the retreat through the dusty windshield. It didn't feel like a place people left. It felt like a place people disappeared into. He stepped out, boots crunching onto sun-bleached gravel. The New Mexico air was dry enough to burn the back of his throat, thick with the scent of scorched sage and old timber. His clerical collar felt tighter than usual. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was the purpose that brought him here, a question no one had answered, wrapped in too much silence and too many unsigned letters. Before him rose the chapel. Its steeple was cracked straight down the center. The wooden cross at its peak scorched and split lightning strike, most likely a jagged scar against the blue-gray sky. The bell, if there still was one, didn't ring. No bird stirred. The windows, once vibrant with stained glass, now stared empty, glassless, and hollow, like eye sockets long since dried of tears. The rest of the structure stretched behind the chapel, a low-slung row of buildings, dormitories, perhaps, or reflection rooms connected by breezeways overgrown with brown weeds and blistered prayer flags. Reverend Marks approached slowly, his shadow long in the afternoon light. Each step stirred up the smell of dust and something else. Something older. Oil, incense, blood. He paused at the chapel's double doors. They weren't locked. The wood groaned when he pushed, swinging open just wide enough for him to slip through. Inside, it was darker than it should have been. The high ceiling had lost most of its plaster, and the light that filtered in came fractured and pale through holes in the roof. Rows of pews waited in neat formation, though their cushions had long since been eaten by time and termites. At the front of the room stood a simple altar, and behind it, nailed into the wall, a crucifix blackened by soot. It smelled faintly of ash and melted wax. He walked the center aisle slowly, the floorboards creaking beneath him with each step. Near the altar, a faded piece of cloth lay crumpled on the floor, a woman's scarf, perhaps, or a veil. He kneeled, not to pray, but to feel. He placed his palm on the stone beneath the altar, cold, undisturbed, and yet heavy, like something had been buried there, not in the ground, but in the air. Jonah stood again, taking a slow breath as his eyes adjusted to the gloom. His fingers found the inside pocket of his jacket, pulling out the envelope the diocese had given him. Contained 3 things: a brief, vague report about concerns raised at Bitter Creek, a photo of a young woman in a novice's habit, her name was Clara Monroe, and a note scribbled in hurried pen. No more letters, just send someone. No date, no signature. Jonah had asked for details. The bishop had simply said, "You're the only one who's been there before. You'll know what to look for." He did not. Not yet. He glanced one more time at the cracked cross above the altar, then turned toward the side door leading to the rest of the complex. The wind outside had died. The silence inside had not. Something waited here, something forgotten, or forced to be forgotten. He would not leave until he found it. Chapter 2. The woman no one remembered. The kitchen hall smelled of dry beans, scorched metal, and something older like vinegar left too long in a sunlit jar. Reverend Jonah Marks stepped inside, wiping the dust off his boots at the threshold. Though the floor was already layered in it, the light filtering in from the small, high windows was the color of brittle paper, and the silence that met him was not born of peace. It was a silence that knew too much. 4 women sat around the long wooden table, kitchen staff, judging by their aprons and calloused hands. They looked up as Jonah entered, their eyes heavy with something that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't far from it either. One of them, an older woman with silver streaks in her braid, stood slowly, as though bracing for a question she hoped wouldn't come. He introduced himself, soft-spoken but firm, said he was here on behalf of the diocese, said he was looking into reports concerning one of the residents on Doyle. The name did something strange to the room. One woman's hands clenched her apron, another's eyes flicked to the far wall. The older one swallowed hard and offered a tight nod. "Don't know that name," she said carefully. But she did. They all did. And they all knew they weren't supposed to. Jonah didn't push. Not yet. He thanked them, let the silence settle again, and walked toward the back hallway, where the dormitories lined the narrow corridor like ribs. The retreat had once housed over 20 sisters and staff, but now only a few remained. Those who had chosen to stay, or those who couldn't leave the hallway, was cooler than the rest of the building. The air felt still, as if it hadn't been disturbed in days. He passed doors, each marked with simple brass numbers. Most were ajar, except one, room 11. The door was shut, its edges sealed with old masking tape, as if to keep something in or out. The nameplate had been removed, but the number remained, faded but visible. He paused there for a moment, fingers brushing the wood. The knob turned easily, and the door creaked open with the slow groan of wood remembering sorrow. The room was small, barely the size of a prison cell, but neat. The bed was made with almost military precision. The sheets were thin and coarse, hospital issue, no suitcase, no shoes, no clothes, but on the cot, right on the pillow, was a drawing, a childlike sketch, done in blue pencil on yellowed paper, slightly crumpled. It showed a woman underwater, arms reaching upward, her hair drifting like smoke. Her mouth was open in a scream or perhaps a song. Above her, distorted by imaginary waves, floated something that looked like hands or shadows. Jonah sat on the bed slowly, picking up the drawing with careful fingers. The page trembled, though not from his hands. The air in the room felt wrong, thick and low, like the seconds before thunder. He looked toward the desk in the corner. No lamp, no books, no crucifix, only a cup, dry and cracked, with a D scratched into the ceramic base. Anna Doyle had been here. This had been her space. And yet it felt like she had never been meant to stay. Jonah stood, folding the drawing and slipping it into the pocket of his coat. The room offered no more, but the absence of Anna's things felt louder than any testimony. It was as if she'd never unpacked, or never had the chance. He exited quietly and moved toward the old archive room at the end of the hall. Unsure of why, just a pull, an instinct honed by years of uncovering what others buried. The door wasn't locked. Inside, metal cabinets stood in sagging rows, their drawers half open, their contents yellowing and unloved. Dust hung in beams of stale light like smoke in a church. He flipped through one drawer, marked Residency 2003 to 2018. Names scrawled on manila folders, some typed, some handwritten. Then he found it: Doyle, ANNA, accepted, August 2017. He pulled the folder and opened it across a nearby desk. Inside were exactly 4 items: a passport copy from Indiana, a letter from a hospital in Albuquerque, referring her as in recovery, a handwritten application form, brief, sparse, nearly blank, and a printed sheet labeled "No Further Inquiry." That was it. No photo, no medical records, no religious background. Just a folder marked with ink that had bled through the paper, like it wanted to disappear. Jonah sighed, his hand lingering over the phrase. In recovery. Recovery from what? Addiction, trauma, something else. And why would that warrant her sudden silence? As he placed the folder back, something else caught his eye at the very bottom of the drawer, a thin envelope wedged beneath the metal. It had no label, no recipient. Inside, a single note, scrawled in frantic ink. She wasn't supposed to talk to Ruth. She wasn't supposed to remember. His chest tightened. Who was Ruth? And what had Anna remembered? Jonah stepped out into the hallway again, the drawing now a weight in his coat. The air felt even heavier now, as if the building itself was aware of his movements. The chapel bell outside gave a single groan, whined, tugging at its rusted weight, or something else. He paused by the window and looked out across the retreat grounds. A lone figure stood far beyond the chapel fence. A woman, or so it seemed, small, still, facing the chapel. By the time he blinked, she was gone. Chapter 3. a hollow beneath the floor. The west corridor of the retreat was quieter than the others, if that was even possible in a place that already seemed to hold its breath. Reverend Jonah Marks walked slowly, his boots echoing against warped floorboards as dust twirled in shafts of afternoon light. The air smelled of old wood, forgotten prayers, and something faintly metallic like dried blood or rusted faith. He passed the chapel's original vestry, where the walls had faded from soft cream to the color of bone. Above a crooked doorframe, the words in Manus Tuas Domini were barely legible, cracked and worn. To the right, a wooden panel buckled slightly from the wall. Curious, Jonah pressed his hand against it, but nothing moved. It was the next step that did it. A hollow thunk. He froze, retraced. There it was again. Not the creak of wood this was. Different, not broken, empty. Jonah knelt down, running his fingers across the floorboards until he found the one that shifted slightly beneath pressure. With care, he used his penknife to lift the warped plank. Underneath was a shallow cavity, long enough for a child to lie in, but narrow, almost suffocating. Inside, wrapped in flaking cloth and buried under layers of settled dust, was a small wooden box. He lifted it carefully and opened the lid. What lay inside wasn't valuable in any traditional sense, but in a place like this, secrets were currency. Letters, dozens of them. The envelopes were yellowed, the ink faded, the corners curled from heat or age. Every one was addressed to the same name, Anna Doyle. He pulled one free and unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was shaky, but legible. I saw them again. At the edge of the orchard. They think I don't notice when they move the statues. Another letter, dated months before Anna's supposed disappearance. Read. The chapel's bell rang at 3 a.m. again. No one pulled the rope. And then, a third. Just 6 words. They're watching again. Always have been. Jonah exhaled slowly. The hairs on his arms stood up. Something in the cadence of the letters, part confession, part journal, part desperate plea, felt far too lucid to be dismissed as delusion, and too vivid to be forgotten. He continued reading. I tried to tell Sister Marian. She said it was my imagination. But the door in the kitchen hallway doesn't lock anymore. They come through it, sometimes, and leave it open, just a crack. The letter wasn't signed. Jonah folded it carefully and placed it back inside the box. One by one, he thumbed through the stack. Some letters bore tiny sketches, eyes drawn in quick graphite, repeated over and over in margins. One envelope had dried red wax smeared across its flap. Another contained only a torn photograph, burned at the edges, of a woman standing behind a stained glass window. Whoever had written these letters had either been trying to warn Anna, or Anna herself had written them. And if it was the latter, then the retreat was keeping more than just silence within its walls. He looked back at the hole in the floor. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide these, that someone didn't want the truth to be found. Jonah stood up, knees cracking, and placed the box under his arm. He didn't reseal the floorboard. Let it remain open. Let the wound breathe. From down the corridor, a gust of hot desert wind crept in through an old window pane, making the candle on the wall sconce flicker. Shadows danced across the hallway, bending and elongating like figures creeping out from the walls. He turned, took one step back toward the main hall and paused. There, in the still air, came a sound like whispered paper, the letters. Jonah spun back, but the box remained closed. The sound had come from the wall. The retreat wasn't finished speaking yet. Chapter 4. The greenhouse without light. The sun was sliding low over the cracked hills of Carson Hollow as Reverend Jonah Marks followed a winding path behind the chapel. The air was thick with the smell of baked earth and old weeds, the sky a wide, breathless stretch of pale fire. He walked slowly, his boots crunching over dried grass and forgotten gravel, as if every step required permission from the land itself. Brother Henry, the retreat's groundskeeper, led him without speaking. The old man's face was drawn with the kind of weariness that didn't come from years but from the weight of unspoken things. When they reached the back edge of the property, he simply gestured with a nod. There, he said, hasn't been touched in years. It was barely visible through the tangled greenhouse, or what was left of one. The once clear glass panels were now a mosaic of moss, dust, and shattered corners. Ivy had claimed the structure like it was trying to erase it. Vines curled around the frame, through the cracks, and across the floor like veins grown from the sins of the soil. Jonah stepped through the rusted door. The hinges groaned like a wounded animal. Inside, the air was different, damp, metallic, and stifling, like a lung holding its breath. The faint green light through the vine-choked glass gave everything a sickly hue. There were no flowers, no herbs, no smell of life. Only decay and the echo of something left too long in silence. He moved slowly, scanning the long-forgotten planting. Beds, dry leaves lay like curled fingers, and toppled clay pots spilled soil like broken urns. There was a hush here, not peaceful, but guarded, a silence that pressed against the skin dot near the far wall. Something caught his eye. A small ceramic dove, white and chipped, rested atop a cracked mound of dirt. Its wings were partially buried, its beak snapped off. Beside it, pinned under a stone, was a yellowed slip of paper. The edges were torn, damp, and warped, but the message was clear. What they planted still grows. Jonah picked it up carefully, as if the paper itself might whisper something, if handled too roughly. His fingers brushed away grit as he turned it over, blank on the back. No signature, no date, just a quiet, damning sentence. He looked again at the dove. It hadn't been placed like a decoration. It looked buried, forgotten, left like an offering, or a warning. Jonah backed away slowly, heart heavy with the weight of the words. As he moved, he stepped on something brittle. A broken flower pot crumbled beneath his boot, spilling out what looked like withered roots, but there was something else tangled among them, a thin red ribbon. He crouched and pulled gently. Attached to the ribbon was another note, sealed with wax, but broken open long ago. Inside, the handwriting was slanted and frantic, and the ink had bled into the fibers. They said it would fade, that the soil forgets, but it's still here, still breathing. He stood, the note trembling slightly in his grip. He could feel the greenhouse closing in around him, the heat, the rot, the memory of something that refused to die. It wasn't just the plants that had taken root here, it was guilt, it was grief. A shadow passed across the glass above him. Not from a bird, there were no birds here, but from the shape of ivy creeping silently, slowly across the panels, as if trying to seal the truth back in. He turned toward the exit, but paused. The greenhouse, even in ruin, felt inhabited. Watched, every corner was a breath held in waiting, the kind of place where truth didn't shout, it grew wild, hidden, beneath layers of dust and vines, until someone dared to look too closely. Jonah wiped his palms on his slacks and stepped back into the light of the dying sun. Behind him, the greenhouse sat still and silent, its glass heart broken but not empty. And somewhere beneath the tangled green, something continued to grow, something that never should have been planted. Chapter 5. A knock at 3:03. It was the kind of hour when the world feels thin, when even silence seems louder than breath. Just past 3 a.m., Reverend Jonah Marks stirred in his narrow bed, unsure whether the sound he heard was a knock or a dream folding itself into the real. Then it came again, 3 soft raps against the door to his room. Not urgent, not casual, measured, like a confession too delicate to shout. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and reached for the candle on the nightstand. The flame flickered as if it, too, was hesitant to confront what waited beyond the door. He pulled on his coat and crossed the creaky wooden floor. When he opened the door, the dim hallway stretched before him like a spine of shadow. Standing there was Martha Kinder Retreat's longtime cook, in her worn shawl, her hands trembling around a candle stub. She looked less like a woman, and more like a story unraveling. "Reverend," she whispered, her voice breaking against the hush. "I heard something the night she vanished." Jonah gently stepped aside, and she entered as if walking into sanctuary. He guided her to the chair beside the cold fireplace, placed a blanket around her shoulders, and waited. Her eyes searched the floor, not as though looking for words, but as though remembering where they had fallen. "It was just after midnight," she said. "I was baking, couldn't sleep, old joints acting up. That's when I heard it. Voices not raised, just ... close, like the kind you use when you're hiding something." She paused, breath catching. One of them called her by a name that wasn't hers. "I swear it, not Anna, not Miss Doyle. It was something else. Eleanor." Jonah blinked. "Are you certain?" Martha nodded slowly. "I've baked through more than 30 winters in that kitchen, Reverend. I know voices when I hear em. And whoever was with her, he wasn't from here." His voice had a sharpness to it, trained, clipped, like someone used to being obeyed. Outside, the wind picked up, whispering through the cracks in the wooden walls. It sounded almost like it was repeating the name Eleanor again and again. "Did you tell anyone else?" Jonah asked. "Sister Lila told me to stay quiet, said the bishop would handle it, but he never came." No one came but you. Jonah leaned forward, the name burning in his memory. What else did you hear? Martha hesitated, her eyes clouded. I heard the chapel bell ring once. Just once. And no one was near the tower. I checked. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded piece of cloth. Inside was a thin gold chain with a delicate pendant hand-etched sparrow. Found this outside the kitchen door, same night. It wasn't there earlier. Jonah took it gently. It's not Anna's. No. And no one's claimed it. He thanked her, and she stood to leave, pausing at the threshold. There's something wrong. Under this roof, Reverend Afflet, something that doesn't want to be seen. And it's using our silence as shelter. After Martha left, Jonah sat motionless for a long time, the pendant heavy in his palm. The sparrow was beautifully made, with tiny feathered etchings along its wings. Not the sort of trinket one misplaces. Not here, not now. The name Eleanor gnawed at him. He lit a fresh candle and pulled out the file folder the diocese had provided. There were background notes on Anna Doyle, but nowhere did the name Eleanor appear. No aliases, no alternate identities. Just a short biography. Graduate of St. Catherine's Seminary. Sent to Bitter Creek 6 months ago. Quiet disposition, good standing. That was it. Too neat. Too shallow. He opened his notebook and jotted down, Eleanor. Military-style voice. Bell, at 3A.M. Pendant. Sparrow motif. A shadow moved across the window, but when he looked up, it was gone. Jonah reminded himself this place wasn't haunted. Not by ghosts, anyway. It was haunted by memory, by omissions, by things that refused to stay buried. He turned to the pendant again. The backside held an engraving. You are not forgotten. His breath caught. That was no mass-market inscription. That was personal, intentional. He rose, took his coat, and made his way toward the records room. If the retreat had once housed women under other names, if Eleanor had once lived here, there had to be a record, a transfer note, a letter, something. The corridor stretched long and cold. His footsteps echoed. Candles flickered on old wooden sconces. As he reached the end of the hall, he paused before a portrait of the original founder, Father Dennis Mallory. The man's eyes were kind but painted too dark. Behind that smile, Jonah sensed something buried, like guilt passed on through brushstrokes. He opened the records door. Dust spiraled in the candlelight. Stacks of folders lined the room, some crumbling at the edges, others so pristine they looked untouched. He scanned the shelves. Doyle, Anna, present, Doyle, Eleanor, missing. He froze. There it was. Another file, older, weather-worn, the same last name. He pulled it out. Inside were medical notes, transfer records, psychological evaluations. Eleanor Doyle, admitted 12 years prior. Diagnosed with acute anxiety following trauma. No family. Ward of the diocese. Last known note. Transferred to undisclosed location. Authorization. Bishop Kellor. No forwarding address. No further documents. He placed the file beside Anna's 2 sisters. Or the same girl, re-entered under a new name. He didn't know yet, but someone at Bitter Creek did, and they'd gone to great lengths to forget. Chapter 6. Fire in the iron stove. The late afternoon light had begun to dim when Jonah stepped into the old common room, the quietest place in the entire retreat. Once a gathering space filled with voices, shared prayers, and tea-steeped evenings, it now carried a silence that felt less like peace and more like forgetting. Dust floated lazily in the amber light, catching on faded drapes and wooden armrests polished by hands long gone. The fireplace was cold, yet something about it drew him immediately, not because it offered warmth, but because it had clearly once devoured something meant to disappear. The cast-iron stove stood at the far end of the room, its surface aged and blackened with years of use. Jonah crouched beside it and gently opened the belly of the beast. Ashes spilled forward in a gentle cascade, thick and chalky. He didn't breathe for a moment, letting the dust settle as if it might whisper something to him. There, buried within the pale ruin of paper in time, he found it, a fragment curled, brittle, its edges singed and edges flaking at his touch. But the ink, faint and trembling, remained legible in a single chilling phrase. She knows. Jonah's eyes narrowed. The script was rushed, almost frantic, as if written in a moment of panic. Above it, barely visible but unmistakable, was an insignia, a phoenix mid-flight, its wings ablaze, and yet bound by chains. The emblem struck a nerve in his chest. Not from memory, but from instinct. Something about it didn't belong in a place like this. Not in a convent. Not on a note buried in an iron stove. And certainly not paired with a message as cryptic and final as that. He gently extracted the half-burned paper and laid it on the nearby table. The ashes around it formed small black islands, and the air smelled of scorched ink and secrets sealed in fire. He sifted further through the debris with a metal spoon he found in a drawer nearby. More fragments, some unreadable, others covered in soot. He found the charred corner of a photograph, just the edge of a shoulder, maybe a braid. Someone had burned this deliberately, but not completely, almost as if part of them wanted the truth to survive. Jonah leaned back in the old armchair beside the stove, the burned note between his fingers, eyes locked on the strange emblem, a phoenix, a symbol of rebirth. But here, chained, restrained, suffocated. He pulled out his worn notebook and sketched the symbol as best he could. Then he wrote underneath, "Check military archives, private security, cult insignias," but deep inside, he knew this was connected to something large or something, neither ecclesiastical nor spiritual, something operational. As the wind rattled the stained windows and dusk crept through the crooked floorboards, Jonah's thoughts drifted back to the timeline, Anna Doyle's disappearance, the note, the voice calling her a name that wasn't hers, and now, this, a message reduced to ash, whispering that she knew. The question was no longer what had happened, but who else knew it had happened. Jonah stood and walked to the bookcase that lined the opposite wall. Behind a row of religious volumes, he found something odd, a gap. Inside, hidden behind a loose panel, lay a thin file. He pulled it out slowly. It was water-damaged and fragile, but intact. Inside were 3 pages of administrative memos with official letterheads, not from the church, but from a non-profit medical research entity. The dates went back 5 years. The retreat had been receiving visitors under the guise of spiritual therapy. Some had stayed for weeks. Most were women. The names were redacted. There was a single name that wasn't. Margaret Sloan. Jonah closed his eyes. That name had appeared on one of the returned letters from the bishop's folder. A burning began to rise in his gut. Not fear, not even anger. It was urgency. Urgency laced with grief. Whoever Margaret was, she had either vanished or she had become someone else. Just like Anna. He returned to the stove and looked again at the ashes. There were still small coals glowing deep within the heap, like eyes refusing to shut. He stared at them in silence, then reached for the fire poker. What had been buried here would not stay buried. Chapter 7. The name on the beam. The stairwell smelled of mildew and stories no one had ever finished. The narrow passage, wedged between 2 collapsed wings of the retreat house, had likely been built long before fire codes or design symmetry mattered. Jonah wouldn't have noticed it if the edge of a torn curtain hadn't caught on the sole of his boot. He turned, flashlight raised, and stared into the sliver of darkness behind the hanging drape. A low groan echoed faintly as he pushed the fabric aside. Stale air greeted him. Wood creaked beneath his feet, and the plaster along the walls sagged like tired skin. The banister had splinters, the steps moaned like old men, and the wallpaper had long since surrendered to yellowed, brittle, peeled in strips like the memory of something best left buried. Jonah's breath caught as he spotted it. Half hidden, beneath curling wallpaper, just above the 7th step, was a carving in the wood. He stepped closer, heart thudding gently, not with fear, but with the quiet anticipation of recognition. The letters were sharp and uneven, scratched in with a nail or a blade, not written for beauty but out of desperation. Anna plus Ruth. No more silence. His flashlight trembled slightly in his grip. Jonah blinked, suddenly remembering a name that hadn't surfaced in years. Ruth Mays. She had been a wild-eyed runaway from a nearby freight town, rumored to sleep in abandoned rail cars and show up at the retreat gates for food or a place to rest. No one had seen her since last summer, just before Anna Doyle had arrived. He crouched and touched the carved wood gently. The grooves were deep, recent. The dust hadn't yet settled in the cuts. This wasn't a faded memory. It was a cry that still echoed. No more silence. He whispered. Had Ruth and Anna known each other? Were they part of something deeper than charity or accident? Back in the retreat's main hallway, Jonah pored through the old visitor logs, stored in a tin box under the registrar's desk. Most names were scribbled without care, some in illegible scrawls, others just initials. But then between an entry dated June 14th and another from July 3rd was a name written in a bolder, more purposeful hand, Armaze. Next to it, assisted garden, maintenance, limited stay. That was it. No forwarding contact, no signature, no checkout time. Jonah leaned back in the cracked leather chair, thinking of the greenhouse, the note about what had been planted, and the name scratched into the stairwell beam. Ruth hadn't simply passed through. She'd witnessed something, or been dragged into something. No more silence. The phrase looped through his mind again, like a warning and a plea. He wandered back toward the stairwell, flashlight in hand, heart aching with the weight of unasked questions. What if Ruth had been the one trying to protect Anna? Or worse, what if she had failed? The stairwell itself led nowhere, just a narrow landing, a boarded window, and dust too deep to have been disturbed recently. But Jonah noticed something else. A small box of chalk rested on the floor beside the beam. 3 sticks remained white, yellow, and red, crumbled and stained by time. He looked up, and just beneath the carved names, in a shakier, softer hand, someone had written in red, "I tried to tell her. She wouldn't leave." Jonah stepped back, staring at the message. It was fading, nearly washed away by moisture, but it was there, a testimony in silence, a final sentence from someone who didn't make it past that landing. He descended slowly and stepped out into the corridor, where light pooled like gold on the worn wood. He knew now what the next step had to be. If he wanted answers, he had to find Ruth Mays, and she had to still be out there. Chapter 8. The boxcar Truth. The sun had nearly dipped beneath the edge of the western ridge, spilling a last breath of golden light across the rusting skeletons of the abandoned train yard. The place was a memory, fossilized in iron and dust. Rows of decaying boxcars stood like forgotten tombs, their paint blistered, wheels frozen in rust, doors pried half open by wind and time. Jonah stepped cautiously over broken rail ties and brittle grass, his eyes scanning the maze of steel and shadow. The silence was unlike the quiet of the retreat. It was heavier here, the kind of silence that absorbed sound instead of returning it, the kind of silence that had watched things and kept them secret. He found her in the 3rd car from the south, its faded number barely visible beneath layers of sun-baked grime. A flicker caught his Aja candle's glow, weak but alive. "Ruth," he called out gently, his voice barely above the scrape of gravel under his boots. The figure inside recoiled at first, then slowly emerged from the shadows. She was wrapped in a tattered wool blanket, her hair tangled, face pale with old fear. The sharpness in her eyes, however, remained intact, cautious, alert, exhausted but not broken. "You're the preacher," she whispered. Jonah nodded. "I'm not here to hurt you." She blinked, then nodded back once, slowly, as if granting access to a fortress long kept sealed. Inside the boxcar, warmth met ruin. Dozens of half-burnt candles lit the interior in soft, dancing light. Stacks of dog-eared books, water-damaged papers, a radio missing its cord. She had carved a home from exile, but one cobbled together from the discarded remnants of stories no one wanted. "Anna told me you'd come one day," Ruth said. Jonah froze. "You knew her?" Ruth gave a brittle laugh. "You don't forget people like Anna Doyle, especially when they whisper things that make the air colder." He knelt near one of the crates she'd turned into a table. "What did she whisper?" Ruth sat opposite him, her back resting against the curved wall of the car, eyes flickering as if seeing something behind him. Behind the moment, she tried to stop them. Ruth began, her voice shaking. "She said something bad was under that chapel. Said it wasn't just a room, it was where people disappeared." Jonah waited, patient. "I thought she was unraveling," Ruth continued. "But then she showed me the floor plan. A second sub-basement, a room with no name." Jonah's skin prickled. "She said they took children, not just from around here, from other towns. Transports, files. She found records, names that weren't supposed to exist." "Who was they?" Jonah asked softly. Ruth shook her head violently. "I don't know, but Anna said some of them still wore uniforms, just not government ones. She said, the chapel cross isn't just a symbol, it marks something, a passage, a kind of lock." Jonah's heart thumped. It matched too closely with the burned insignia he found. The phoenix in chains, military, or a shadow of one. "I told her to run," Ruth said, eyes welling, "but she stayed. She said she couldn't leave without making it stop." Jonah stared at the flickering candlelight reflecting in Ruth's tears. "She told me if anything happened, I should tell someone who wouldn't look away. You waited, Jonah whispered. I was hoping it wouldn't have to be real, she replied. That maybe she'd just gone. Jonah reached into his coat and pulled out the folded drawing Anna had left behind the woman underwater. Ruth nodded when she saw it. She said, that's how it feels. Like you're sinking, and no one sees. They sat in silence. Two people, surrounded by ghosts, one returning, one left behind. When Jonah finally stood, Ruth reached behind one of the crates and handed him a photograph. It was old, folded at the corners, and blurry dot in it. Anna stood beside a wall of filing cabinets, holding a paper with red stamps. Her face was defiant. She gave me this the day before she vanished, Ruth said. She told me if I ever saw someone who believed in the quiet kind of justice, to give it to them. Jonah accepted the photograph. It burned in his hand like purpose. Outside, the sky deepened to indigo. The boxcar's glow flickered behind him. It was time to go back. But now, he wasn't returning to find answers. He was returning to confront the truth. Chapter 9. Beneath the cross the chapel was quiet, too quiet for dusk. The last streaks of burnt orange sun crept through the stained glass, casting fractured saints across cracked wooden pews. Dust floated like old spirits, swirling silently. Above the altar, Jonah stepped forward, boots thudding dully against the stone floor. The silence felt thicker here, more, intentional. He had returned straight from the train yard, Ruth's photograph still burning in his pocket. And now, he stood before the very thing Anna had feared. The cross behind the altar was made of stone, unusual for a place so simple. It jutted from the floor like a tombstone, its surface worn smooth from generations of prayer and unknowing reverence. But there were marks Jonah hadn't noticed before, hairline fractures, chips along the edge, as if someone had once tried to pry it loose. He knelt, hands tracing along the base until he found a barely visible seam, a rectangle carved in the stone floor, its edges aligned too precisely to be random. A hatch. Jonah exhaled and pressed. At first, nothing. Then, with a groan, the stone lid shifted. Dust flew upward as the stale breath of the underground released itself. The scent was heavy old paper, cold stone, iron. He found an iron loop embedded in the hatch and pulled. With a reluctant squeal, the trapdoor lifted, revealing steep stairs descending into a narrow stone shaft, swallowed in shadow. Jonah lit a candle from the altar and stepped down. Each step, cracked with age, moisture beaded along the walls. The ceiling was just low enough to force him into a cautious hunch. After what felt like 30 steps, the passage opened into a room the size of a chapel vestry, but instead of pews or icons, there were files, boxes, cabinets, wood warped with rot and time. Dozens of sealed crates stacked high, many stamped with outdated military insignia. A red phoenix, its wings bound in iron chains, the same symbol he had seen in the ashes of the stove. He approached a table where papers had been strewn, like someone once left in a hurry or was taken. Flickering candlelight revealed orphanage records, names, birthplaces, transfer locations. Some were typed neatly, others handwritten in thick, urgent strokes. One note simply read, "She was too old to forget." A chill ran through Jonah. Another paper listed payouts from private military accounts to a series of religious institutions. One name was circled in red ink, Saint Agnes Women's Retreat, Phase 2. He knew that name. And at the bottom of the folder was a grainy photocopy of a child's drawing identical to the one Anna had left behind on her bed. The woman in water, hands stretched upward. Anna hadn't been paranoid. She had known Jonah, sank into a wooden chair tucked between filing cabinets, the creak echoing off the stone. His mind reeled with questions, and every answer was another weight on his chest. He reached for a worn folder bound with black string. Inside, a registry of transfers, dozens of names, mostly girls grouped by date and exit location. But the destination column was always blank. Some had notes in red pen, compliant. Others had numbers that looked like experiment codes, and one page held a name circled 3 times, Anna Doyle. She had been marked. A sharp sound echoed above a creak, soft and quick. Jonah looked up instinctively, but the trapdoor was closed again. He hadn't heard it move. His candle flickered violently, then steadied. He stood, breath shallow, scanning the room once more. One cabinet at the far end stood ajar. Inside it, a manila envelope with a Polaroid tucked halfway out. He pulled it free. That showed the chapel years ago. In front stood 3 men in military uniform. Behind them, A group of young girls, heads bowed. In the corner of the photo, barely visible, was the edge of the stone cross. Jonah turned it over, written in blue ink. Only one tried to come back. His stomach twisted. Anna's message, her cry, now in his hands. Everything she'd risked had led to this place. Every missing file, every burned paper, every whispered warning, it was all real. Jonah collected what he could: photographs, folders, marked documents, and placed them in his bag. But before he left, he took one last glance at the room. And for a moment, he imagined her standing there. Anna, brave, terrified, determined. He whispered, "You weren't forgotten." Then, with trembling fingers, he climbed back up into the chapel, sealing the hatch behind him. Chapter 10. She fell, not fainted. The bell rang just once, soft and slow, signaling morning prayers. The retreat chapel filled with quiet footsteps, candlelight flickering against the polished wood of pews. Women in modest dresses filed in wordlessly, their heads bowed under veils the color of ash. The air smelled of lavender oil and old pages. Jonah sat alone in the far corner, half in shadow. He wasn't there to pray, at least not in the way they were. His eyes scanned the room, moving over the sisters with faces like folded secrets. Some nodded gently to him, others avoided his gaze altogether. But then, at the front of the room, just as the first verse of the psalm left Sister Jane's lips, Martha Keene collapsed. There was no cry, no gasp, only the soft sound of her shawl crumpling to the floor and the dull thud of her knees hitting wood. She didn't crumple like a woman fainting. She fell like something inside her had broken free. A candle near the altar flickered violently. Snuffed out, the room froze. Jonah was the first to rise. He crossed the aisle with urgency, kneeling beside Martha. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment and focused, wet with confusion, but then they settled. Her old hands, trembling and brittle as tree bark, pressed something into his palm. It was a torn page, curled and faded at the corners. He unfolded it with care. The handwriting was frantic, pressed hard into the paper, as if written during panic. They threatened her. They called it God's will. She tried to warn Ruth before they found out. Jonah looked up. Around him, the sisters began whispering low murmurs, like the hiss of wind through a cracked window. It wasn't just concern, it was fear. They had seen something like this before. Someone tried to light the extinguished candle again, but the match wouldn't catch. Martha's lips moved again. Jonah leaned close. "She didn't run," the old woman whispered. "They said she left, but they made her leave. You understand?" Her voice caught. And then, with a faint groan, she lost consciousness. Jonah stood slowly, the page still in his hand. The whispers grew behind him. "She fainted." "No, she fell." "Did you see it?" "Why now?" Was she speaking to him? The Reverend turned to face them all. His voice remained low, but clear. "She needs a doctor." "Sister," Miriam nodded, vanishing through the back door. But Jonah knew the doctor would take time if he ever came at all. What mattered now was the note. The sisters parted silently as he walked toward the exit, like a tide moving around a rock. Outside, the wind had risen. Dry leaves scraped across the stones, the sky already turning pale yellow. Despite the early hour, he walked toward the chapel's office, the note clenched tightly in his fist. He needed to know if Martha had written this herself, for if someone had slipped it to her. But more than that, he needed to know who they were. Inside the small office, Jonah shut the door and unrolled the journal page on the desk. The handwriting didn't match Martha's. It was younger, firmer, rushed but consistent. Anna, it had to be. The realization struck him like a nail driven into bone. Anna had left this behind, maybe slipped it into Martha's apron, maybe whispered her name that final night. Martha had carried this burden for days, weeks, and now she had broken. Jonah scanned the drawers of the desk until he found what he needed. The original journal entries the bishop's courier had delivered before Jonah's arrival. Most were mundane lists of supplies, daily prayers, notes about gardening and plumbing. But then came a different tone, an entry marked with the dates 3 days before Anna vanished. She asked about the lower room again. I told her it was sealed for good reason. She asked, what reason? I didn't answer. She asked who built it. I lied. Another, dated the following night. They warned me, said I had to choose. God's will, they called it. But I hear Anna at night, still walking the halls. I saw Ruth in town last week. She wouldn't look at me. He read it 3 times. These weren't Anna's words. This was someone else, someone caught in between, the whispers in the chapel, the unease among the staff, the flickering candles, the bell that rang at odd hours, though no one touched the rope. Jonah stood. This place wasn't haunted by spirits, it was haunted by choices, by people who knew more than they admitted, by those who stayed silent, and those who refused. He stepped back out into the hallway. The nurse had arrived. Martha was being carried to her room, eyes closed, her hand still curled as if holding the note. Sister Jane approached cautiously. She has moments, she whispered, clarity. Then, she drifts. Jonah nodded. She's told me more than you realize. Jane didn't argue. Back in his quarters, Jonah laid the torn journal page beside Ruth's photo, the floorboard letters, and the burned military insignia. Piece by piece, it was all forming a picture he could no longer ignore. And in the center of it all was Anna Doyle, who had fought, warned, and vanished. She had not fainted either. They made her fall. Chapter 11, Lace in the Tower. The wind arrived first, before the bell, before the sun. It crept through cracks in the stone walls of St. Gertrude's Retreat, like a warning too old to name. Jonah awoke with its cold breath brushing across his eyelids, rustling the pages on his desk. The room was still steeped in the deep navy of pre-dawn. Then came the bell. Just one toll, not long, not rushed, not pulled in haste or by accident, but deliberate, clear, measured. He sat up, fully alert now. The bell hadn't rung at this hour since he'd arrived, and according to Sister Miriam, it hadn't rung at dawn in years. His boots were on before the echo had faded. Down the corridor, he passed quiet doors and untouched candles. Outside, the grass was stiff with frost. Shadows moved like old regrets across the courtyard. The chapel tower rose above him like a broken tooth against the paling sky. With each step up the spiral staircase, Jonah's breath grew colder, the stone beneath his hand older, rougher. The wooden stairs creaked some more than others, and he counted them without meaning to. A nervous habit from his youth. 40-7. He reached the top and pushed open the narrow hatch. The bellroom was empty, not a soul, only the golden wash of morning peeking through the slatted windows, illuminating the dust in long shafts. The bell itself stood motionless, as if in mourning, but then he saw it. From the thick, rough rope that hung down the length of the tower, something swayed gently in the breeze. A length of lace, frayed and ghost-white, tied with quiet care. Jonah stepped closer. His hand trembled as he touched it. It was delicate, like the kind found on veils, like the one Anna wore in the photo Ruth had given him. There was no mistaking it. This piece had been hers. He didn't know how, he knew only that he did. The texture, the slight scent of lavender, still clinging to it, the almost imperceptible embroidered line of thread shaped like a cross at the corner, all unmistakably Anna. The wind caught it again, lifting the lace like breath, like a message. She had come here, or someone had brought this here for him to find. He scanned the floor, no footprints in the dust, no oil from lanterns, no creak from the hatch behind him, but he was not alone. The air was heavy with memory, the kind that had nothing to do with time. This was not a prank, not the work of any remaining sister. This was a signal, a sign, a whisper from someone who had no voice left to speak with. Jonah knelt at the base of the rope, the lace still brushing the back of his fingers. His other hand reached for the small leather notebook in his coat pocket, the one filled with observations, sketches, notes, and broken truths. He added a new line. Dawn, bell tolled once. Tower empty, Anna's lace tied to the rope. This place is still speaking, even when no one dares to listen. For a moment, he simply breathed. The tower held its silence like an altar. Then he noticed the crack, just above the bolt that secured the bell. The stone arch showed a fresh fissure, thin, but sharp, like the place had winced under the weight of being watched again. Had someone climbed to the very top, hung this from the outside, or passed through the rope shaft? Jonah stood slowly and moved to the window. From here, the entire retreat unfolded beneath him. The courtyard, the orchard, the burned field beyond where the chapel's annex once stood. The greenhouse's shattered glass glinted in the sun's first rays, and there, down near the southwest corner, a figure moved, too far to see clearly. But it wasn't a sister. No veil, no robe, just a long coat and hair unbound, catching the wind like the lace in his hand. Ruth. He descended the stairs 2 at a time, his breath fast, heart pounding. When he burst through the chapel doors, the figure was gone, not a sound. Not even footprints in the frost. But at the base of the bell tower, tucked between stones like a secret, he found a second scrap of lace, folded over twice. Unfolded, it revealed a symbol burned into the fabric with the tip of a match, a bird in chains, the same one he had seen in the ashes of the iron stove. He held it tightly and whispered, "Anna, I see you." Jonah walked back toward the chapel, every step heavier than the last. She was gone. But she hadn't vanished. She was leading him, piece by piece, sound by sound, lace by lace. Chapter 12. A Cold Confession. The office had always been the coldest room in the retreat. Even in summer, the stone walls refused warmth. The air carried the scent of dry paper, faded ink, and something else old, antiseptic and forgotten resolve. The window faced north and let in a light that never softened, only chilled. And that was fitting, Jonah thought, because this was the room where truths came to die politely. He stood in the doorway now, staring at the woman behind the desk. Sister Adrian didn't look up. Her hands were folded precisely on a plain, leather-bound ledger. The desk was empty, except for a crucifix, a teacup gone cold, and a small army badge encased in a cracked glass frame. Her veil was stiff, perfectly ironed, her posture unshaken by time or storm. But Jonah could see it, in the tension at the corners of her mouth, in the way her thumb ran over her other knuckles again and again, like she was trying to rub away something only she could feel. He closed the door behind him. "You rang the bell," she said without looking. "Didn't you?" "No," Jonah replied. "But I heard it." A long pause. Then finally, she raised her gaze. And when she did, her eyes were the same color as the old walls, gray, chipped, unblinking. "You've been digging," she said. "I've been praying," he answered. Another silence. Adrian gestured to the chair opposite her. "Sit, Reverend." He didn't. Instead, he took a step closer to the desk and laid down what he had brought. Anna's lace, now folded and kept in a small cloth bag. He also placed the page torn from Martha's journal. And finally, the file he had recovered from the cellar under the cross. Sister Adrian looked at none of it. "You knew," Jonah said. His voice wasn't angry, it was tired, hollow. Adrian finally spoke, her tone flat. "I knew more than I wanted, less than I should have, and too much to leave it alone." "And Anna?" Jonah asked. Adrian's fingers twitched. She found things she wasn't meant to. Things that weren't hers to question. Like what? Like contracts, names, movements, transfers that weren't authorized by the church but endorsed by people with different missions. Jonah leaned in, voice low. "Military ones." She blinked once. "I worked in clinics before I came here," she said. "Base hospitals. You patch them up, send them back out, and you tell yourself it's medicine, not politics." Her voice trembled just once, like a fault line shifting far below the surface. "She came to me," Adrian continued. "Anna, she had that kind of soft rebellion. She wasn't loud, but she saw. She noticed who wasn't on the rosters. She noticed which girls left and never sent word again." Jonah was silent, letting the air fill with the weight of the unsaid. "She was asking questions," Adrian muttered, "and they warned her." Her jaw locked. "Donors, veterans, old names that still write checks. You think this place runs on prayer and soup?" He didn't flinch. "You knew she was in danger." "I thought she'd leave," she said bitterly. "I thought she'd be smart enough." Jonah's voice cracked. "You think silence is smart?" She looked up at him again and, this time, her eyes burned. "No," she said. "I think silence is survival." The room had grown darker without them noticing. Clouds had rolled over the retreat, casting hard shadows across Adrian's desk. The blue light from the northern window fractured through the glass like a stain. The crucifix on the desk cast a long, broken silhouette between them. Jonah stepped back. "You let it happen." Adrian said nothing, but her hands curled into fists. She wanted to speak. He continued. "She wrote to the press. She kept records. She begged someone to listen. She would have burned the whole place down." Adrian snapped. "Maybe it needed burning. Do you know what happened here in the 70s? She whispered. "Do you know what this place held back? How many broken girls we cleaned up after because no one else would?" Jonah's voice softened. "That's not what this is about." "No," she agreed. "It's about control. And what happens when someone threatens it." She stood now, not tall, not loud but steady. She wouldn't stay silent. Adrian said again, as if it were a crime. "We protected something bigger than her." There it was, the confession, not a scream. not even a defense, just a plain, cold admission. Jonah stepped back, and Adrian sat down. "You'll want to go to the bishop," she said. "They'll stonewall you." "I already have." Her gaze didn't change. "Then you've already lost." He picked up the lace and turned to leave. At the door, he stopped. "She wasn't just a girl with questions," he said. "She was a voice, one you helped bury." Adrian didn't respond as he closed the door behind him. The hallway outside was quiet, too quiet, and as he walked down that corridor, one thought echoed louder than any bell. She hadn't been silenced, not completely, because he had heard her, and others would, too. Chapter 13. Letters that waited. Anna Doyle's room had been sealed, but time had always known how to trespass. The door creaked like an old whisper as Jonah pushed it open. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of dry linens, wood polish, and something more human, faint traces of lavender and ink. Dust hovered in stillness, like it too had been waiting. He stepped inside. The room was small, monastic, a single narrow bed against the wall, its sheets folded tightly, as if untouched since the day she disappeared. A wardrobe stood open, just an inch, like someone had closed it in haste. A scarf, delicate and floral, hung from one hook. Near the foot of the bed was a desk, modest and made of pine, its edges worn by time and worry. But it was the desk that pulled him closer. Not the bed, not the wardrobe, not even the scarf. The desk had stories still breathing through it. The chair was tucked in gently, and a single white candle had burned almost all the way down to the base. Its wax had spilled onto a stack of unopened envelopes, each one addressed in the same neat, resolute hand. Jonah slowly lowered himself into the chair. There were more than a dozen letters, all sealed but unsent. Their recipients, local and national newspapers, investigative reporters, advocacy groups, even a radio host known for exposing abuse in religious institutions. Each one was addressed with care. He picked up the first. "To the editor, Albuquerque Tribune," it began. The ink had smudged slightly in places, not from water, but from hesitation. Her handwriting was elegant but pressed-like. She had written it in one breath and exhaled the weight of it after. He read the opening lines. "I write to you not as a child, but as a witness. What's happening behind the chapel walls at Carson Hollow Retreat is not of God, it is not of country, it is of secrecy, silence, and shame." Jonah's eyes lingered on that last word. He opened the next dot. It spoke of falsified intake recruitsolvents who arrived with false names or were transferred without notice to unknown homes, of forged parental signatures, of undocumented payments. One letter mentioned the rooms without files, children who were never written down, never acknowledged, never followed up. Another letter described a man named Elisa Forma, military officer who had visited monthly, always at night, always carrying a briefcase. Anna had seen too much. But the most damning letter was the one that never made. It passed her own drawer. It was not addressed. It was not even signed. It began mid-sentence. "I know what they're doing. I know what Adrienne did. I know what they called it. They said it was for clearance. But no child is ever born with a clearance level. I am scared. But I will not let Ruth go unspoken for." Jonah placed it down, hands trembling. Not from fear, but from grief. He stared at the letters for a long while. He imagined her here, sitting in the very chair he now occupied, maybe late at night, maybe right after Vespers, alone, with only the ticking of the hallway clock and the wind tapping on the window pane, writing, stopping, writing again, tearing up a draft, starting another, then finally, sealing it only to hesitate at the final step, mailing it. Her pen had not failed, her mind had not wavered, but something had clenched around her courage. He looked around the room. On the far wall, above the desk, a small corkboard held just one item, a yellowed clipping from an old newspaper article. The headline read, "Church official denies allegations of abuse in rural diocese." It was circled in red. Jonah stood. He walked to the wardrobe and opened it fully. Inside, among the modest clothes, was a shoebox. Inside the box, photographs, some of children, some of adults in uniforms, some of rooms documented with timestamps, and labels like storage room C or file room locked. Anna had been building a case. He turned back to the desk. And for the first time, Jonah noticed a faint line scratched into the wood just above the writing surface. It was nearly invisible, but in the low glow of the candlelight, It revealed itself. Etched into the pine were 3 words: "If I vanish." Just that. No tell them, no look here. Just a silent clause. Jonah whispered her name. Anna. There was a sorrow that hung between each object in the room: the scarf, the clipped article, the letters without stamps. The candle nearly burned to nothing. He gathered everything gently, as if afraid it would crumble if touched too roughly. He packed the letters, the photos, the shoebox, even the scarf. He knew what he had to do next. But even more than that, he knew he wasn't alone anymore. Anna had spoken, maybe not with voice, maybe not with survival, but with witness, and he would become the echo she never got to hear. Chapter 14. The Road Beyond. The sun hadn't fully risen when Jonah Marks stepped onto the cracked pavement of Route 178, just outside Carson Hollow. The old road cut through the desert like a scar that time never bothered to heal. And behind him the retreat, the chapel, the dormitories, the greenhouse. They burned, not with the fury of vengeance, but with the slow, hungry exhale of memory finally surrendering itself to ash. He didn't light the match. He didn't have to dot the wind. Did that dot the ancient wood? Dried from years of silence, had only waited for a spark. Jonah hadn't run. He hadn't rushed. He had watched. He stood there as orange licked the edges of the chapel roof and turned the broken cross into a torch, as the greenhouse glass popped like brittle bones, as the smoke curled up toward the soft blue of morning, dragging every whisper in secret with it. In his hands, a bundle of letters tied together with a silk ribbon that had once belonged to Anna. Alongside them, a strip of her veil found in the bell tower days before. The wind tugged at it gently, as if asking to carry it away, but Jonah held it tight. These weren't just papers. They were truth. Raw, unsent, still breathing. The desert was utterly still except for the sound of shifting dust and the soft, persistent crackling behind him. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, but tests you. As if the land wanted to know what kind of man you really were when there was nothing left to lean on but yourself. He walked a few steps forward. The road curved slightly eastward, toward a sign nearly swallowed by rust and time. Mobile minus 116 miles. Jonah hadn't thought about Mobile in years. It was a city where he once spoke boldly, where sermons came easy, and comfort was a mask worn well. But that man was gone, burned away with the walls of the retreat. He looked again at the lace, delicate as breath. It shimmered slightly in the morning light. He imagined Anna holding it, sewing it, folding it, maybe even clinging to it during the nights she wanted to run but couldn't. Now, in his hand, it was both a relic and a responsibility. The wind shifted behind him. The main chapel's tower gave in to gravity and collapsed inward with a groan. Sparks flew like stars across the retreat yard, then faded before they reached the road. He didn't turn around. There was nothing left back there that deserved his gaze. Jonah's boots crunched against gravel as he made his way slowly along the edge of the highway. No cars, no trucks, just his own shadow, growing longer as the sun climbed. With every step he weighed the same question. Do I tell them? Do I tell the world what I've seen? The letters said everything: clear, meticulous, desperate. Anna's voice was in every sentence. Her sorrow, her fury, her hope, even the ones she never mailed, had the ring of testimony, not complaint. She hadn't written to be heard. She had written because staying silent was worse than being ignored. But he also thought of Ruth, still hidden in her boxcar, of Martha, now gone, of the girls who had passed through the retreat over the decades, some adopted, some vanished, some forever written out of history with a forged name and a new birthday. Was justice the flame, or the flood? Would the truth heal the wounds, or split them wider? He paused at a small rise in the road. From here, he could just make out the final smolder of the retreat on the horizon. The place where so much had been buried under dirt, under faith, under bureaucracy and fear. He took out the letters again. His hands were dusty. His shirt smelled of smoke, but he unfolded the first one as if for the first time. It began. There are things happening here no one wants to believe, but I saw them, I heard them, and I will not die holding someone else's sin in my mouth. He folded it again. He would not burn this. He would carry it and deliver it, maybe, not to the loudest place, but to the right one, far down the highway. A small shape began to shimmer in the heat. An old delivery truck, headed west. Jonah didn't wave it down. He didn't need a ride. He needed the walk, because the road wasn't just distance anymore. It was penance. It was calling. It was calling. It was Anna's final chapter and his first honest one. Chapter 15. A box and a candle. The train from Carson Hollow to Santa Fe cut through the dawn like a memory refusing to fade. Jonah Marks sat still, pressed against the window, holding a weathered satchel on his lap. Inside, wrapped in linen, were Anna's letters and the scrap of veil that had followed him like breaths since the bell tower. The fire was long behind him now. Its smoke lost to desert winds, but its weight remained. Santa Fe shimmered in soft gold when he arrived. Tourists filled the plaza. Musicians played old songs beneath Pueblo balconies. Church bells rang from adobe steeples. But Jonah didn't hear music. He heard a voice, soft, torn by fear, but unbroken. She spoke. He repeated it like a tether in his mind. Not for comfort, for resolve. His boots echoed across the stone floor of the diocesan building, polished and silent, as if untouched by the chaos he had just walked through. A young receptionist looked up, startled by the dust and soot on his collar, but said nothing. He asked to see Bishop Renterelitas. An hour passed in a side chamber with high windows and the scent of old books. When the door opened, Bishop Renterelis entered quietly, his expression unreadable. A man of peace, but not of blindness. Jonah stood. He didn't give a sermon. He handed over the wooden box. It was hand-carved oak, with dovetail joints, a box that once held communion linens, or perhaps confessions written on folded parchment. Now, it held a different kind of truth. "I'm not here to accuse," Jonah said, voice low but unwavering. "But this belongs to more than just memory. It belongs to light." The bishop opened it slowly, fingers shaking just slightly. The letters were still tied in ribbon. The veil still held a scent of smoke and sage. "She wrote everything," Jonah said. "What she saw, what she endured, what she tried to stop." He paused. "What she died knowing." The bishop closed the box and placed both hands atop it. "Pray on this," he said. Jonah nodded. "So will I, but that's not enough anymore." That night, back in his small second-story apartment overlooking Agua Fria Street, Jonah moved with a stillness that felt earned. His hands ached, his back felt older, but inside, something had shifted like dust swept from a chapel floor. He had done what he came to do. And yet, sleep did not come. Instead, he lit a candle. Its glow flickered against a wall of old books and framed newspaper clippings. Sermons he once gave, people he once tried to save. But tonight, the room belonged to Anna. He placed a small ceramic dish beside the flame and laid one of her sketches beside it, the drawing of a woman beneath the water, the same one found on her cot. He smoothed its corners, then rested both palms on the table as if in prayer. "She spoke," he whispered, and then again, stronger, she spoke, out loud now, into the room, into the dark. He didn't need the world to answer him, but someone would, one day. That's how these things worked. The veil always lifted, the fire always cleared. He leaned back in the chair and let the candle burn. Down. Outside, Santa Fe exhaled into its quiet hours. Traffic slowed, dogs barked once, then settled. Inside, a man kept vigil out of guilt. Not even grief, but for the sake of someone who had been silenced and dared to speak anyway. Far away, the ashes of the retreat cooled beneath the desert sky. But in this room, a single flame burned on.